give you one more minute and then I'm going to start teaching. The fun part of teaching during a school day. Yeah. You can work over there. It's fine. But who's outside? We were, yeah. This is always up and. Aha. We're going to do a class. We're going to watch online. Come on in. Welcome. We're almost on. We're going to be using the Sidurim, the red Sidur Lev Shalem. They're off to the side. Welcome, welcome. So grab a Sidur, one for each person. We're just about ready to go. Oh, yeah. Everything goes live and goes on YouTube and it's there forever. So hopefully no mistakes, huh? All right, we're going to start. Welcome, everyone. I wish everyone a good noon, not necessarily a good morning or a good afternoon, but a good noon. And we are back to a series that we are calling Meaning and Methods of Prayer. We had a 3-part series earlier in the summer before the Yamim Noraim, before the High Holy Days, where we were looking specifically at the liturgy, the prayer book of the Machzor for High Holy Days, to kind of get some insight as to what the meaning of the holidays were and some of the special prayers that were included, and a lot of exploration of the sacred texts that really help to make our high holidays what they are. So now this is the first class in a series that I want to focus on not the high holy days, but our regular lives as Jews. But specifically, I want to focus on our Shabbat Sidur. Shabbat Sidur. Shabbat Sidur, we pray out of Sidur Lev Shalem. This is a beautiful new-ish publication from the Rabbinical Assembly. I believe it came out in 2015 or so, 2016. We acquired these Sidurim due to a generous donation from one of our wonderful members, Judy Fisher, who enabled us to acquire literally thousands of Sidurim for our large community. And we use them every Shabbat, for Friday night, for Saturday morning, and for Shabbat Mincha. And this is also our Sidur for Chagim, for festivals, for Passover, for Shavuot, for Sukkot, and also Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. And it's really been a wonderful resource for our community. If you remember the old Sidur Sim Shalom, they were blue. It was beautiful. The font, in my opinion, was a little bit easier to read. If you open up this Siddur, it's kind of more of a modern Hebrew font, so it's a little bit harder to read, but once you get used to it, it adds a nice little flair of Hidur mitzvah to beautify the mitzvah of prayer. It makes the text look a little bit more beautiful. But the old Siddur Sim Shalom just had the Hebrew on the right side and the English on the left side and really nothing else. And if you look inside of this Siddur, you get a really wonderful addition of commentary in the margins, which really adds to explain the prayer, give some extra kavanah, give some extra background, textual interpretation. It really adds to our study of the Siddur for a class setting, and also if you need a little bit of an extra boost of kavanah, of focus during your tefillot, it's a wonderful place to look at. So over the next few weeks, I'd love to get through the entire Shabbat service. Now that's a lot to take in because, as you know, we pray 3 times a day, and in the order of Jewish days, it's the evening service first, the morning service, and then we're going to have an additional service called Musaf as part of our morning service, and then we're going to have the Mincha prayer as well in the afternoon. And just to review, why do we start in the evening? Why don't we start in the morning? Why isn't the morning the first service? Anyone know? Not all at once now. So if we look back to Bereshit, to Genesis, it says, Vayehi Erev, Vayehi Voker, Yom Rishon. There was evening and there was morning, a first day. So to follow exactly what is written, Kakatuv B'Torah, that is written in the Torah, there was evening and there was morning, a first day. So that's why our Jewish days begin in the evening. So today happens to be the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Cheshvan, and this evening, right at sundown, will begin the 10th day of the Hebrew month of Cheshvan. The same reason why we have Rosh Hashanah, beginning with Erev Rosh Hashanah the night before, right? Yom Kippur begins with Kol Nidrei the night before, okay, or actually begins before sundown. That's the one holiday that begins before the sun actually sets. So too is the case with our Jewish Sabbath, Shabbat. Shabbat does not begin on Saturday morning, even though Saturday is Shabbat. When does Shabbat begin? Shabbat begins sundown on Friday night. And we can even bring it in a little bit earlier, about 18 minutes beforehand. We can light the candles, and then Shabbat has officially begun. And Shabbat, unlike every other Jewish day, does not have 24 hours. How long is Shabbat? A little less, 25 hours, right? So we have 25 hours of Shabbat. It begins with sundown on Friday night, and it goes till about 1 hour after sundown on Saturday night. And the halachic way of seeing when Shabbat ends is when you see 3 stars in the sky, right? So to see the stars, then you're at the end of Shabbat. But now we kind of do it by calculation. Some people will have Shabbat end 72 minutes afterwards, 60 minutes afterwards. The earliest you can end Shabbat is 48 minutes. So thank God there are apps, and there's something called a hebcal.com. You can download all the Hebrew dates, candle lighting times, Torah parshiot to your phone. It's extremely handy, especially if you live a Jewish life, which I recommend just to follow along. Living in the Jewish calendar is something that's really special, really holy, really sacred, and adds a lot of meaning to our lives, just come from a personal perspective. So today I want to focus on the first service for Shabbat. So what happens on Friday night? If you come into this room right here, Cohen Chapel, we have Kabbalat Shabbat services every Friday night. Friday evening, we don't really change times. Traditionally, you will have the service right in the evening after Shabbat has actually begun. But here in our tradition, the Minhag HaMakom, the tradition of our synagogue, is to always have our services at 5:45 p.m. So Friday night, 5:45 p.m., we have what's called our Kabbalat Shabbat service, which translates into receiving Shabbat. Lekabel Kabbalat means to receive the Shabbat. It's a special service that we only have one day a week that's added to our regular liturgy that helps us welcome in Shabbat. As I was mentioning, we have prayer services 3 times a day. Evening, morning, and afternoon. And each of the prayer services have their own specific components. So if this happened to be just a regular weekday evening service, just for context, the service would have two main parts. We would start the service, an evening service, non-Shabbat, with the call to worship, the Baruch Hu. Okay? The Baruch Hu, the call to worship, is recited in the morning service and in the evening service, but not in the afternoon service. We have the call to worship, and then we have the Shema and its blessings. The Shema is going to be the first central part of our service. It's our central declaration of faith. And then once we have the Shema and its blessings, there's a couple blessings before, a couple blessings afterwards, then we have the central prayer of the service, which is called the Amidah, the standing prayer. Okay, and the Amidah is, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about it in our class, comparing it to how it is from the evening to the morning to Musaf and to the afternoon, since it is the central part of our liturgy. But I just wanted to say that we are going to use that as a basis for our evening services, where we have the Shema and its blessings, and then we have the Amidah, which is our central standing prayer. So on Shabbat, we're going to have a very special additional service that's going to make a distinction between the week that has ended and the most important day of the week, Shabbat. Okay? So let's open up our Sidurim. Hi. We're going to use a... No worries. All good. We're going to use the Sidur Lev Shalem, and we're going to be on page 10. Page 10 is going to be what's called Hakdama, an introductory song that welcomes in Shabbat. So this is just kind of like before we officially dive into our Kabbalat Shabbat and our evening service, we're going to have just a really beautiful song that's going to kind of make that distinction between the end of the work week and the start of the holiest day of the week. And it's actually a holiday if you think about it. Like, what's a holiday? A holiday is a day that is different from all others. Shabbat is a holiday. Doesn't matter that it happens every single week, right? Shabbat is part of the fabric of creation. Shabbat is the weekend. We have it because we are told that God also rested on the seventh day. So we're not doing this by accident. Okay, and before times of Judaism, like there was working 24/7. There was no stop. There was no cessation of work. But one of the beautiful things that our tradition brought to the world is this idea that you do not work 7 days a week. You have one day to just be, to exist, to love, to appreciate, and to give thanks for all of the blessings that are in our lives. So this song over here, Yedid Nefesh, it's attributed to Eliezer Azikri from 1533 to 1600. It's become one of the favorite songs with which to introduce the Friday evening service. Yedid Nefesh av harachaman meshoch avdach el retzonach. Beloved of my soul, compassionate Father, draw me, your servant, to your desire. Would that I could run like a gazelle and bow before your beauty, for I find your love sweeter than honey or any delight. Beautiful poetry that really helps to set the mood, to take that stress, to take all the worry that we have during the week, and to allow us to come together and make that distinction between the work week and Shabbat. And one other word about Shabbat. We are told over and over again, you should not work on Shabbat. But that's not enough, okay? If you are worrying about work, that unread email, that the house stuff that needs to go on, all the unfinished work projects, people that you need to reach out to, all these things that are kind of like worrying you down. If you're worrying about that on Shabbat, you're working on Shabbat. So for those 25 hours, the rabbis tell us, your work is done. It is done. At the end of Shabbat, it'll be back. But for those 25 hours, work is done. It is forbidden from working and is forbidden to even think about working or worrying about working. And I find that so beautiful in our tradition. So we have this beautiful introductory poem, Yedid Nefesh, which kind of helps set the tone of Shabbat. And then on the next about 10 pages or so, starting on page 11, we are in the formal Kabbalat Shabbat service. And as I mentioned, Kabbalat Shabbat is the extra service that's added right before the formal prayers on Friday night that are going to help us bring in the Shabbat with extra joy. And what's beautiful about Kabbalat Shabbat is we have one psalm for each day of the week. Kabbalat Shabbat consists of 6 different psalms, and then we have Lecha Dodi, which is a really beautiful, another poem. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then we have the psalm for Shabbat. So 6 psalms, one for each of the days of the week: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We have Lecha Dodi, and then we have the psalm for Shabbat. And the Shabbat officially begins when we recite the psalm for Shabbat. Everything else is welcoming Shabbat, in preparation for Shabbat. So if you look on page 11, and just one more word about the Siddur, if you have it in front of you or if you're watching, if you look on both sides, it's going to be the same number. You're going to have page 11 on both sides. The right side is going to be the traditional Hebrew text, okay, over there on the right. And then on the left side, in the black text, that's going to be the translation of the Hebrew. And one beautiful addition for many of the tefillot, many of the prayers in our Siddur, the text in red on the left side, you see that? Text in red, that's our transliteration. Transliteration. So if you're not very comfortable with Hebrew, or if you know someone that's not very comfortable with Hebrew, or you just don't feel like having the effort to read the Hebrew, it's there for you in English letters. Lechu neranana ladonai. It's there to help you follow along in the service or follow along in the prayers if you wish to do that in the English transliteration as opposed to the traditional Hebrew text. And then on the margins, as I was mentioning, on both the left side and the right side, you're going to find explanations of prayers, especially on the right side, the history of where it comes from. And then on the left side, you're going to have extra kavanot, extra teachings from all throughout our tradition, from ancient sages to modern scholars as well, that will help direct our focus for this specific prayer. So I encourage you not just to, open up this prayer book during services, but to take it home, to really flip through it, to get inspiration from the words on the page. This is really a phenomenal project from the Rabbinical Assembly with members of the Cantor's Assembly as well that helped to put this this new modern Siddur together. Okay, so we have our psalm for Sunday, Lechu neranana ladonai. And our tradition attributes the book of Psalms to King David. These are all individual prayers that David wrote to express glory to God, to give thanks to God, and sometimes to even ask God for certain things. Very personal prayers. And a lot of our liturgy is taken from the Psalms because they are so personal. They are so they really help to evoke our connection to the divine. But we'll find that these Psalms on Friday night are going to be mostly Psalms of praise, Psalms of exaltation, Psalms of giving thanks to God, Psalms of really enthroning God as divine. So, Lechu neranana ladonai, let us go and sing to Adonai, let us trumpet praise to our protector, filled with thanks, let us greet God, raising our voice in song. Okay, so really getting us into the mood here to start to build up our energy slowly but surely, one day at a time. And if you notice in our Siddur as well, on top of page 11, we have a big red aleph. See that? Right above let us go on the left side and above lechu neranana on the right side. This is going to be aleph for the first day of the week. The Siddur is also very helpful in bringing the history and the structure of the Siddur to the forefront of letting you know where we are in the Siddur. And a question for YouTube chat, what is the Siddur? Maybe I already answered this, but the Siddur is Siddur Lev Shalem. This is available from the Rabbinic Assembly, and this is the Siddur that we use on Shabbat morning for Shabbat and festivals. And we have copies here at the synagogue. You can definitely buy one online. During the pandemic, it was made available generously via the Rabbinic Assembly to everyone, but post-pandemic, we really do encourage you to buy your own copy if you can. So we have the first psalm, the psalm for Sunday, on page 11. And if you look at the bottom of page 11, it says read continued. You guys see that? That means the psalm is not over. So you turn the page to page 12, and we have the concluding verses of Psalm 95. And the role of the prayer leader, by the way, I didn't actually talk about this in the last class, but my role as a cantor, or whoever's leading the service, basically it is assumed, for better or for worse, that everyone is able to pray the prayers individually. And the cantor's role, the chazan's role, is to make sure that everyone's praying at the same pace. So if I were leading a Kabbalat Shabbat service traditionally, at the top of page 11, I would start, Lechu neranana Adonai nari aletzur yishenu, and then daven, 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 people would pray silently. I'd give people a chance to do that. And then once that's all done, once people have done that, I would then come in chanting the last few lines on page 12. See that red triangle? The red triangle is called the Chatima. There's a red triangle 3 times on the page. On the right side for the traditional English, on the left side for the English. Traditional Hebrew on the right side, the translation in the English on the left side, and the transliteration. So as the cantor, I would do Arba'im shana kult bedor v'homar am toy levavhem vehem lo yara'u derachai asher nishbati ve'apim yavo'un el menuchati. So that's traditional. So I would be chanting the first few words of each psalm, and then the last chatima, according to where it is marked in the Siddur. And then once I'm finished with that, you would know to turn the page and then start Shir Ladonai, Shir Chadash. You would start the next psalm individually. So that's traditional. If you go to a traditional service, and sometimes here we do more of a traditional style, but the more in non-Orthodox synagogues, the more common practice will be to use Kabbalat Shabbat as a time for singing, as a time for celebrating, and a time to kind of get us in the mood. So oftentimes at the beginning of page 11, we'll join together in a song. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, Adonai. Many different melodies have been set, both, kind of a little bit more historic and modern, to add to the joy and beauty of Shabbat. So sometimes when we're just doing songs, we'll skip around in the Siddur, go from here to there. But I want to talk about kind of how the liturgy would function in a traditional way. Okay, so we have the beginning and the end that the cantor will chant for each of the psalms. So that's Psalm 95, ending with the verse, "For 40 years I was troubled by that generation, and I said, these are a people whose hearts have gone astray. They do not know my way. So in anger I swore they would not enter my rest." Kind of a little ominous end to Psalm 95, but we're working our way up. Remember, this is Kabbalat Shabbat. We have 6 psalms before we get to Shabbat. This is number 1 for Sunday. The next psalms are going to go in order. So we have Psalm 95 for Sunday, 96 for Monday, 97 for Tuesday, 98 for Wednesday, 99 for Thursday, and then we're going to have Psalm 29 for Friday. So let's turn the page to page 13. Here is our psalm for Monday, the second day of the week. We've got a big bet at the top. Psalm 96 begins a series of 4 psalms that alternate between exultant song and the declaration of God as sovereign. Psalms 96 and 98 both commence with the words Shiru Ladonai Shir Chadash, sing to Adonai a new song, and Psalms 97 and 99 with Adonai Malach, God reigns. And the 2 themes are intertwined on Shabbat, as Jewish mystics remark, our songs are God's crown. Okay, so the next 4 songs going back and forth between singing a new song to God and God is supreme. God is reigning. So this one, Psalm for Monday on 13, sing unto Adonai a new song, sing unto Adonai all the earth, sing to Adonai, praise God's name, day after day, tell of God's deliverance. Okay, and more daven, 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 more giving God glory, offer to Adonai peoples of the world, offer to Adonai honor and strength, turn the page, bow to Adonai in the glory of his holy place. On page 14, we see the concluding verses of Psalm 96. Yismechu hashamayim, beautiful song. Yismechu hashamayim, yismechu hashamayim. Okay, so this one, the heavens shall be glad and the earths rejoice, and the earth rejoice, the sea and its fullness roar, the meadows and all that grows in them exult. Even the trees of the forests shall sing praise, as Adonai comes to judge the earth, judging lands with righteousness and people with divine truth. Okay, still a little bit of judgment, still a little bit of trembling here, but still a lot more joy as we're ascending this ladder of praise leading to Shabbat Kodesh. Okay, that's Psalm 96. And if you look in the commentary on the left side on page 14, you have from the Song of Songs, which is from Ketuvim. Beautiful. So another beautiful piece of poetry here that helps us really get in this mood of letting go of the stresses of the week and entering Shabbat. Page 15, Gimel, Psalm 97, our psalm for Tuesday, third day of the week. Remember, Sunday is the first day. Shabbat, Saturday, is the last day of the week. Shabbat is number 7. So the week begins with Sunday as day 1, Monday as day 2, and here we go with Gimel, Adonai Malach, Tagel Haaretz, the psalm for Tuesday. Let the earth be glad, the many distant lands rejoice. Clouds and thick darkness surround divine righteousness and justice secure God's throne. Fire goes before God, consuming besiegers round about that. Okay, lots of visions over here of nature, flashes of lightning. The earth watches and trembles. Mountains melt like wax. The approach of Adonai. So really a vision of God as supreme, as beyond time and space, to really get us to focus on being present with the divine on Shabbat. And the concluding verses of Psalm 97 on page 16, starting at the red triangle, those who love Adonai hate evil. God protects the lives of the faithful, saving them from the hands of the sinful. Or zaru alat tzaddik, light is sown for the righteous, and joy for the upright. Rejoice in Adonai, you righteous people, and thank God as you pronounce the divine holy name. So we're kind of getting a sense of connection and thought and turning our focus towards God, a lot of praise, a lot of just kind of getting up. This is all a big warm up for Shabbat. Okay, same thing is true on Psalm 97. This is Psalm 98, as we mentioned, just like Psalm 96. And this is, by the way, on page 17. A lot of numbers between the page numbers and the psalm numbers in the days of the week. So we're on the 4th day of the week, Wednesday, right? We're on Psalm 98, 95, 96, 97, 98, and it's on page 17. So like Psalm 96, this Psalm 2 begins with Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash, sing unto Adonai a new song. And this is even more exuberant than the previous one, describing the musical instruments and human voices accompanying and enhancing the sounds that nature emits at the presence of God. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash, sing to Adonai a new song, for Adonai has wrought wonders. God's right hand and holy arm have brought deliverance. And the concluding verse on page 18, Lifnei Adonai kiva lishpot haaretz. Greeting Adonai who comes to judge the earth, judging the world with justice and the nations with truth. Okay, on to the 5th day of the week, page 19. Adonai malach yirgezu amim. And the first in this series of Psalms, Psalm 95 began with a call to come on a pilgrimage. And now in Psalm 95, the pilgrims are asked to bow down as they arrive at God's holy temple. So we're getting close to God's holy temple. We're approaching the end of the week. The psalm is divided into 2 parts. The first is directed to the nations and announces that the God whom Israel worships should be recognized as the universal God of justice and righteousness. And the second deals more specifically with the people Israel, recalling their spiritual heroes and calling upon the people to observe God's just laws. So Adonai malach yirgezu amim, Adonai reigns, nations tremble. The one enthroned amidst the cherubim makes the world quake. And the concluding verse on page 20. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu vehishtachavu. One of Craig Taubman's most famous pieces, written here, okay, at Sinai Temple. We're very proud of that. Exalt Adonai our God and bow down at God's holy mountain, for Adonai our God is holy. Okay, we've made it through the first 5 days of the week. Now we're getting into the real meat and potatoes. We're about to approach Shabbat. We have the Psalm for Friday, Psalm 29, okay? What's really wonderful about Psalm 29, take a look over here. you're going to see the phrase Kol Adonai. You see that? If you scroll down, Kol Adonai al Hamayim, and then lower, Kol Adonai Bakoach, Kol Adonai Behadar, the voice of God. So it's repeated 7 times, and it's understood in this context to represent the 7 days of the week. Okay? So really, once again, reinforcing this idea that we have one psalm for each day of the week, and as we approach Shabbat, the sages chose a psalm that's really going to get us in the divine presence, and specifically with the 7 recitations of Kol Adonai. So a psalm of David, Mizmor la David, acclaim Adonai, Havel Adonai b'nei Elim, acclaim Adonai, children of the divine, acclaim Adonai with honor and strength, acclaim Adonai with the honor due God's name, and bow before Adonai in the splendor of the sanctuary. And then the last few verses, Adonai lamabul yashav vayeshev Adonai melech leolam. Adonai was enthroned above the floodwaters. Enthroned, Adonai is eternally sovereign. Adonai will grant strength to God's people. Adonai yevarech et amo Yisrael vashalom. Adonai will bless them with peace. And for this prayer, by the way, everyone stands. Everyone is standing up in preparation to receive Shabbat. We are almost there. This is the 6th psalm before we have Lecha Dodi, and then we have the psalm for Shabbat. So we've almost made it there. We're warming ourselves up. We've had a lot of songs. We've had a lot of psalms. We're waking up. We are getting ready, and we're finally almost there. Okay? Turn the page, and we have a little bit of an insert, something that is often skipped here, but a beautiful mystical poem. Ana bakoach gedulat yamincha tatir tzirura. If you would, may your mighty right hand undo the knots that ties us up. So the mystics believed that its primary meaning was lying in the hints that were hidden within its structure, rather than in the literal sense of the words themselves. So instead of looking at the literal meaning, putting different letters together and highlighting certain phrases representing other things, it doesn't have God's name in it, but if you put it together, you have God's name, many different names of God that can be found within this. It's a really wonderful mystical poem. So for example, it says over here, the mystics suggest that the acrostic formed by the first letters of its 42 words hint at an unpronounceable 42-letter name of God. Okay? So for this reason, this prayer is followed by Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed, usually when we say the Shema. So more of a mystical prayer, definitely worthy of its own class of study, but for now, just wanted to call your attention to it, that right as we are about to enter into Shabbat, we have the mystical prayer Ana Bakoach. Okay, we've almost made it to Shabbat. We are at Lecha Dodi, pages 23 through 25. There are thousands of melodies for Lecha Dodi. It's a strophic text. It's so easy to set music to. Lecha Dodi likrat kala panei Shabbat neka bela. 8, right? Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad hishmiyanu elam yuchad. Adonai echad u'shemo echad l'shem u'tiferet v'litila. It's so easy because it's metric that you can just set any piece of music to it. You can set, music that's already written. It's become such a popular piece of liturgy to compose music to, and I think it continued. We have Lecha Dodis new every year. So this is one of those things that just to really help us get in the spirit, it almost invites new melody. Like we said earlier, Shir L'Adonai Shir Chadash, sing a new song to God. This is one of those favorite hymns that really allows us to do it. So the author of Lecha Dodi, his name is Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz, and he passed away in 1576. He was part of a mystical circle in Sfat. So they would go out and actually dress in white and go out into the mountain and greet Shabbat as the sun was setting over the mountains. And good old Shlomo over here, he wanted to make sure that we wouldn't forget him. And we can't forget him, because look at the first letter of each verse. And it's actually emboldened. Shamor, that's a shin. The next verse, likrat, there's a lamed. The third verse, mikdash, and the next page, Hit Na'ari, there's Shlomo. See that? And then on page 24, the second verse, hey, and then The next verse, Lamed. Next page, Vav, and then Yud. Shlomo Halevi. Thank you, Shlomo Halevi, for inserting yourself into Lecha Dodi. We will never forget your name because it is now part of it. Isn't that funny? So it's his own signature that he used the first letter of each verse to spell out his name, Shlomo Halevi. Okay, so come my bride to welcome the bride, come my beloved to welcome the bride. Let us greet Shabbat as she arrives. And this is, chorus and verse. We keep on going back to Lecha Dodi. We sing that. We sing one verse. We go back to Lecha Dodi. Next verse, Lecha Dodi. And there are a total of 9 verses. Traditionally, we do all 9 verses. In non-Orthodox synagogues, I've seen them do, maybe the first 2 verses and then number 9, the first 3 verses and number 9, 1, 2, 3, 5, 9. So people have picked and chose which verses to do. But number 9, if you turn to page 25, the last verse over here, Boi v'shalom ateret ba'ala. Everyone rises and faces the entrance of the synagogue, because this is the moment. This is the moment that we are entering, that we are greeting Shabbat. Shabbat is coming through the door. We've been preparing. We've been getting ready. We've made our house beautiful. We've brought out our finest china. We've brought out our tablecloth. We're dressed in our finest clothes. And now we are ready to welcome in Shabbat for the next 25 hours. Boi v'shalom ateret ba'ala. Come in peace, crown of your spouse, surrounded by gladness and joyous shouts. Come to the faithful, the people you treasure with pride. Come, my bride, come, my bride. The Sabbath is a bride. So this is regal. This is just like greeting the bride. Everyone stands up to greet the bride as she comes in on our wedding day. So too do we greet Shabbat every Friday night as Shabbat is about to enter. Okay? So that's the main part of Kabbalat Shabbat. It's quite a welcome. It's quite a Kabbalah. It's quite a reception and a welcoming in of Shabbat to really make it special and distinct from the rest of the week. Okay, are there any questions? I know yeah. Why is the bride? So it's interesting. In our tradition, the relationship between God and the Jewish people is oftentimes seen as a marriage as well, where God is the groom and we, the Jewish people, are the bride. And then what's the ketubah? The Torah. The Torah is the contract of marriage, stipulating all of the obligations to one another. And the same thing is true for Shabbat, that we treat Shabbat as a bride, to add regality, to add sacredness. And oftentimes there's another dichotomy between the masculine and feminine sides of God. It has to do with sefirot. So there's a lot of mystical explanations behind it, but mostly just to show Shabbat as being so special, so holy, so pure, so unique to our tradition, and to treat that the same way that we treat the bride is really a wonderful thing. Okay. Anyone else? I know I do a lot of lecturing, and so if you have questions, feel free to stop. Page 26. I want to talk a little bit about why this is here. Page 26, it says, comforting the mourners. That seems like a strange thing to do. I thought we're welcoming Shabbat here and everything's all, happy and exciting, and we're getting up, we're dancing, we're greeting the bride. The bride is coming in, and no, let's comfort the mourners. Interesting place for this. So think about that. Kabbalat Shabbat, as beautiful and as celebratory as it is, if you, God forbid, have lost someone dear to you, this is going to be a very difficult service for you to sit through. Even though there's no public mourning on Shabbat, it's kind of hard to just all of a sudden forget about your mourning and just be totally happy and, pretend like nothing's happened over Shabbat, even though we're not allowed to mourn publicly on Shabbat. If you wear a ribbon that you've torn or a torn piece of clothing, you put on regular clothes for Shabbat. You do not wear that ribbon on Shabbat. So in temple times, the mourners would wait outside the temple, and they would come in through a different entrance after Lecha Dodi. Or not, the Lecha Dodi hadn't been introduced, but after Kabbalat Shabbat, after the first 6 psalms, and before they actually had the psalm for Shabbat. And when the mourners would walk in, everyone else would greet them with the traditional words of comfort. Hamakom yanachem etchem betoch she'ar v'lei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May the divine comfort you among all the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And so some communities will follow that practice as well, that people that are in mourning will wait outside for the first 6 psalms, for Kabbalat Shabbat. And then once that's over, the mourners would enter the synagogue, and then everyone else greets them with the words of comfort. So it's actually really beautiful. It's realizing that even at the most joyous times, we have to remember that there is sadness. It's kind of similar to when we break the glass at the end of the Jewish wedding ceremony. We bring a little bit of fear. I think the rabbinic quotes is, where there is a lot of simcha, you have to have a little bit of re'edah. You have to have a little bit of trembling when you have happiness. You have to always be cautious of it, especially, God forbid, now with all the anti-Semitism going on. Like we always have to be aware. We can never completely close our eyes. So we have to add a little bit of trembling, a little bit of reality check, even during our happiest times. And the same thing is true, on Tisha B'Av, on the saddest day of the year. We still have to add a little bit of joy, that there is comfort, and it's happening during the brightest time during the year. It's very bright outside. So our tradition is all about the dichotomy between light and dark, and happiness and sadness. Okay, we've comforted the mourners. And now we have, on pages 27 and 28 and 29, these are the Psalms for Shabbat. We've made it. Once we begin these Psalms, Shabbat has formally begun. So one of the beauties of the past couple of years, it's been, a terrible time during the pandemic, but also the silver lining is that many synagogues and communities have gone digital, are now online. Like, for example, what we're doing right now, it's not just, us gathered together in Cohen Chapel, we're broadcasting to the entire world, which is beautiful. But you can actually also watch traditional synagogues, even Orthodox synagogues. They will broadcast their service on Friday nights up until this psalm. So they will do Lecha Dodi, everything else too, but then the cameras will go off, and then it's Shabbat. Once we have Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat. So once this psalm is recited, that's when Shabbat has officially been brought in the synagogue. So you can watch different streams online, different cantors who broadcast, different rabbis, and you can actually watch them broadcast Friday night services. Even though it is Shabbat, it's not officially the start of Shabbat until we have Psalm 92 and Psalm 93. And these two psalms are treated as one psalm unit. Whenever we have the psalm for Shabbat, it is Psalm 92 and Psalm 93. So Psalm 92 begins, Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat. A psalm is a psalm, the song of the day of Shabbat. So pretty obvious why this psalm was chosen for Shabbat day. It's literally the only one that says this is the psalm for the day of Shabbat. So what do we do on Shabbat? It is good to thank you, Adonai, and sing your name most high, to proclaim your love at daybreak, your faithfulness each night. Finger the lute, pluck the harp, let the sound of the lyre rise up. You gladdened me with your deeds, Adonai, and I shall sing of your handiwork. How wonderful are your works, Adonai, how subtle your designs. The arrogant do not understand, the fool does not comprehend this. The wicked flourish like grass, and every evildoer blossoms, only to be destroyed forever. But you, Adonai, Leolam, are exalted for all time. Next page. Ki hine oyavecha Adonai. Surely your enemies, Adonai, surely your enemies will perish. All who commit evil will be scattered. As a wild bull raises up its horn, you raised my head up high, anointed it with fresh oil. As my enemies gather against me, my gaze remains steady. For my ears listen and hear. O tzaddik katamar yifrach, the righteous flourish like the date palm. thrive like a cedar in Lebanon. Planted in the house of Adonai, they flourish in God's courtyards. In old age, they remain fruitful, still fresh and bountiful, proclaiming, Adonai is upright, my rock in whom there is no flaw. Okay, that's Psalm 92. And then 93, just a few more verses. This is probably why it was attached to Psalm 92, because it's pretty short. It's the psalm that comes right afterwards. There's no specific mention of Shabbat, but it's still in this theme. Adonai malach geut lavesh. Adonai is sovereign, robed in splendor, girded in strength. The earth stands firm, not to be dislodged. From earliest time you were enthroned, you are eternal. The rivers rise up, Adonai, the rivers rise up, their roar. The rivers raise up their waves. Above the roar of the vast sea and the majestic breakers of the ocean, Adonai stands supreme in the heavens. In your house, beautiful in its holiness, your testimonies endure, Adonai, for all time. So now with the recitation of Psalm 92 and 93, creation is seen as complete and is with rest, peace, and the sense of completion that God can be seen as sovereign. And then to conclude Kabbalat Shabbat, some will recite the mourners Kaddish on page 30. So page 30, we have mourners Kaddish. Remember, we have just welcomed in the mourners just right before Psalm 92. They were outside, waiting outside for Kabbalat Shabbat, for the actual welcoming in, going through the Psalms, lifting us up in Lecha Dodi to Shabbat. And then we have mourners Kaddish, Psalm for Shabbat. Okay, and then one more thing I want to talk about. I thought I was going to get through all of Ma'ariv, but silly me. There's too much to do. So we'll extend Ma'ariv for another class as well. But I do want to talk one last thing before we end, and that's the what happens between the mourners Kaddish and the start of the formal service. If you look on pages 31 through 37, I believe, we have study texts. Okay, and the traditional study text is Bameh Madlikin, Uvama Ein Madlikin. So before beginning the evening service, one may choose to study a paragraph or a section of teachings regarding Shabbat. So traditionally, what will be studied in the traditional Siddur will be the laws of Shabbat. Basically, the entire chapter 2, I believe, of Mishnah, talking about what you can and cannot do on Shabbat to make sure that you're not going to break any of the laws of Shabbat before we enter into the service. So we have the first Mishnah quoted over here at the top of page 31. And then instead of doing all of the laws of Shabbat, we have other rabbinic texts to study. So we have the Tur Orach Chaim at the bottom of 31. We have quotations from the Bible on page 32. Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Shabbat, the laws of Shabbat. One sets the dining table before the onset of Shabbat, even if one intends to eat only a tiny amount. Similarly, one sets the table after Shabbat, even if one intends to eat only a small amount, so that Shabbat is honored in both its entry and exit. One should clean and prepare one's house before the onset of Shabbat to honor the day. A lamp should be lit, the table set for eating, and the bed made. All of these are ways to honor Shabbat. Beautiful. So if you're looking for ways to make your Shabbat holy, you can look to some rabbinic texts all the way 33, 34 more, Hilchot Shabbat, Mishnah Torah, the Mishnah for Shabbat, Mishnah Torah, Babylonian Talmud on page 35, Abraham Joshua Heschel, The Sabbath, bottom of page 35, a really beautiful book. And then we have some mystical visions of Shabbat on page 36. And then what we're going to have after the concluding study, once again, another quote from Mishnah Shabbat in the Babylonian Talmud on 37. We have on page 38 a Kaddish de Rabbanan. Kaddish de Rabbanan is traditionally recited by the mourners, but it's also recited by anyone who has completed or heard the teaching of a text based on the Torah. So traditionally an oral text. If you have studied Mishnah or Gemara, the Talmud, you will finish your study session with Kaddish de Rabbanan. So Rabbi Wolpe, at the end of his Torah class, when he did it, now it's Wednesday mornings, it used to be Thursday mornings, he will always end with Kaddish de Rabbanan, because it's a class where you have studied text. So too here, when you have studied texts, especially texts that are commentary on the Torah, that are oral Torah, you conclude with Kaddish de Rabbanan on page 38. Okay? So that is Kabbalat Shabbat, and that will bring us, I guess, next week. I thought we were going to do it today, but that's okay. Next week, we will start with the actual evening service, which will be the Shema and its blessings and the Amidah. So that is the start of our class, our series on the meaning and methods of prayer, focusing on Shabbat and starting with the beginning, Kabbalat Shabbat. So thank you all so much for joining us, and I will see you all next week, same time and same place. Lecha Dodi.